Thank you very much, Father Nikitas, for these introductory words. I would also like to thank from the bottom of my heart Father Stavros Kofinas for this invitation to come again once more among you in such an interesting conference, which started in a very dynamic way with yesterday's words of greeting and the central paper by my dear Thanasis Papathanasiou. I would also like to thank His Eminence for hosting and presiding over this conference. It is a particular honor for me to be among you, especially since I have the possibility to explore an issue entitled, I would say, with like an inhuman and hostile Christ, pastoral implications of a misinterpreted theology. Zorba must have felt a like emotion, for scarcely had we entered the room than he rushed to the bedecked cupboard singer, the woman of 1,000 men, Madame Audence. "Christ is born," he cried. "Greetings to you, female of the species." We sat down at table, we hungrily devoured the dishes and drank the wine. Our bodies were satisfied and our souls thrilled with pleasure. Zorba became lively once more. "Eat and drink," he continually shouted. "Eat and drink, boss, and get warmed up. You sing too, my boy, sing like the shepherds. Glory to the highest. Christ is born. That's nothing to make light of. Pipe up with your song and let God hear you and rejoice." He had quite recovered his spirits, and there was no stopping him. "Christ is born, my wise Solomon, my wretched pen-pusher. Don't go picking things over with a needle. He's born, isn't he? Of course he's born. Don't be daft. If you take a magnifying glass and look at your drinking water, an engineer told me the other day, you will see, he said, that water is full of little worms you cannot see with your naked eye. You will see the worms and you won't drink. You won't drink and you'll curl up with thirst. Smash your glass, boss, and the little worms will vanish and you can drink and be refreshed." So, Christ is born. That's nothing to make light of, declares Nikos Kazantzakis through the mouth of Zorba. And I would like to start with this piece of literature made of clay to show right from the start how difficult and arduous this struggle is. Engagement with the person of Christ is linked with awe and ends in awe. This awe, which is creative, it creates a relation and a community, resistance and change. Sometimes we tend to believe that the story of the Bible is a story which is cloudless, airy and sunny, which, however, does not take into consideration the drama and the tragedy of the mystery of incarnation. Through demolishing use and inhumane religiosity, what was introduced was a new testament, a new world, a testament incomprehensible in the means of systemic thought, because systemic thought used to see and still sees Christ as an exponent of secular power and the advocate of a violent inhumanity, the flag bearer of an anti-biblical cruelty, brutality, and ways drawing from the hell of lack of communion, ghettoization, and absolute absence. The historic examples of such an understanding are many, but I would like to dwell on two of them. First, Judaism. The space and the world, the cosmos of the religious system of the Old Testament, outside history and against history in everything, according to which Messiah was the earthly king, the dominator, the exponent of national resurrection. For this reason, Jesus, the incarnated Word of God the Father, was regarded a heretic, a crook, a magician, a miracle maker, a deceiver, the son of a whore. A person completely different to the person of the constructed mythology of waiting, a person dangerous for the statical character of the building, for the statical character of the system entrapped in history. This is why this way is again history and outside history, based on the pillars of a dominating and callous inhumanity which perpetuate corruption and alienation. A second example is the heretic monophysitism and Diophysitism alike, because they introduce the ontological hostility between man and God, the ontological inhumanity. Let me explain. In my previous studies, I have pointed out that we are in an era when body is under attack. I would better say that being human is under attack. Manhood is under attack. And I believe that this sin starts from a distorted understanding of incarnation. According to this understanding, Christ is not allowed to be a real man, which leads to full degradation or even abolishment of God Himself. Why? What kind of God is a God who, in order to assume manhood, would first make man abandon the essential things of being human? This practice was followed by Nestorius, for example, and Apollinarius, top moralists who are at the extremes of heretic Christology, but nevertheless fully agree on their anthropology. This agreement is based on the altar of full abolishment of the human nature. And this sacrifice, as a repeated mystery, goes on up to date by the new moralists, who cannot and do not understand that man is not the result of an accident. In this way, however, man, being impure and defiled, either goes on staying away from God, justifying the philosophical words that man cannot be mixed with God, according to Nestorius, for example, or man has to come to the meeting and then disappear in the greatness of the God, the Creator. This is monophysitism. So we can easily talk of the apotheosis of man, but not the theosis. We can also support the salvation of the dignity of a just God, but we completely fail to discuss about the abolishment of the ontological loneliness of the human being, that is, the negation of the lack of existence, because, according to Gregory the theologian, for that which he has not assumed, he has not healed, but that which is united to the Godhead is also saved. So, union is of essence. Therefore, we understand that this Christ is the result of a morbid and extreme moralistic religiosity, a systemic hypocrisy which shamelessly or even insensibly proceeds to a total eclipse of humaneness, which means total establishment of inhumanity. And this type of inhumanity gives birth to a hostile Christ, a friendless person taking distance from the mystery of communion. Undoubtedly, a God that cannot become united with man is, in the best case, indifferent to man. And this union is not an abstract fact. It is an apocalypse of consent, acceptance, and forgiveness. An apocalypse of this willingness to empty one's self in order to contain the other, the different, the one that is not. These realities somehow show us this mystery of assumption. Vacuation and assumption are the constituents of a culture of incarnation, which the incarnation that is the highest deed of loving men, a friendship which culminates in the resurrection. Sometimes I think that we keep mentioning the Fourth Chalcedonian Synod of 451, which clarified the way of the union of the created and the uncreated, and of course we are one of the Chalcedonian churches. Nevertheless, we seem to think and operate in a pre-Chalcedonian way, but mainly anti-Chalcedonian. According to this synod, God can be mixed and united with man, which is ignored in modern monophysitism with all its particularities and deviations. For many years, the subversive Yannis Tsarouchis, observing this phenomenon, would write that monophysitism intrudes from everywhere, from the doors, from the windows, and poisons its very existence. And indeed, orthodoxy is linked with Christ and empathy. So he wrote, generally speaking, I'm a Christian, therefore I am a humanist. That is, I accept man as is. Christ says that we have to visit the prisoners. Well, these people have committed acts to the detriment of society. Nevertheless, Christ says, I was in prison too. So, a human being is both virtues and vices. I take man as is. I don't think that he is a perfect creature. In man, we can see the divine part of man. This Chalcedonian character of the thinking and the ways is confirmed by Alexios Savakis in his book Ioannis Tsarouchis. So, Savakis writes, ancient Greek humanism, codified by the Greek fathers of the 4th century, found its perfect exponent in Tsarouchis. He believed in man, in the sanctity of body, in theosis. The lighting of deity passes through all men and offers them divine depth, he said. And there is no truth more heartbreaking for man than light of light, true God of true God, begotten, not created. He was a humanist, or better, he was loving man, and he maintained the ancient Greek decency. So in this sense, he was a real Orthodox, criticizing the Monophysite influences in the Roman Catholic Church. He thought that the Synod of Chalcedon was very important because this was the victory of the Greek humanistic spirit against extreme monophysism, which rejected the human body as a work of the devil. At this point, I would like to clarify something. Many talk of the theocentricity of orthodoxy. They say that there is a theocentric culture, but the way they talk about it make us suspect that they are trapped in a division of the world between what is sacred and what is profane. So we have to be courageous and say it. The culture, the civilization of orthodoxy is mainly and par excellence based on a theocentric humanism. The theocentricity per se is not enough to express the great creation created with blood and tears in history. And I believe what you might already suspect, and I have said this before and I will reiterate it. For one to see the God of orthodoxy, one has to see the man in orthodoxy in the eye. The word, or rather the discourse on God and on man, presuppose and end up in the word, the discourse on man. So this is where the small and the great, the important and the unimportant meet. This world which is both small and great, the human being. The human being reflects his God, his church, his culture, his cosmos. So this type of reality, which is provocative for some minds, is to be found in patristic texts. The low-tone voice seems to be lost in certainties and self-sufficiencies or even complacencies of today's centers of power, where gigantic proportions and the virtual reality of life that have been chosen to save the edifice of the historic anomalies of the past provocatively ignore that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. A scavenger of such forgotten truths, a poet from Thessaloniki, George Themelis, takes on and poetically transforms this humanism, this is the theocentrism of the self-consciousness of the body of the Church, and confesses, disarmingly maybe, without us, what would earth be without us? Anonymous, deserted. Without us, what would heavens be? Shapes without light and without a voice, to give them a name, without eternity. And what would God be without us? Something without a name, without shine. What would the flesh be? Without flesh on the earth, what would be the person of God without the human person, without the human investment and form? What would be the slap in the face? What would be the martyrdom without the human martyrdom? Eke homo, eke Deus. Without the human death, without burial and mourning, without resurrection. Without us, what would death be?
In the same vein, centuries ago, Saint Gregory Palamas, the second patron saint of Thessaloniki, stresses that the inactive is non-existent, which means that from a cognitive point of view, certainly not an ontological point of view, God exists because and thanks to the creation. It is the created that reveal the actions of God and therefore its existence. The inactive God does not exist. It is an par excellence inhumane God, which means that being inhuman is tantamount to be against Christ. There's no doubt that for Christian thinking, history acquires meaning thanks to the incarnation of the Word of the Father, God. Without incarnation, life remains without meeting. And Chrysostom explains
και πώς αυτά μεταρρύθμισε και από δαιμόνων αγγέλους στους ανθρώπους εργάσατο.
The demons were transformed into angels, and all this was done as a sacrifice through the body of God. And then he wondered, my Lord, you did so much wonderful things. Of course, John Donne, the great Anglican poet and theologian, seems had understood something from the mystery of incarnation. In his Sacred Sonnet 15 writes the following: "It was much that man was made like God before, but that God should be made like man much more." Is this beauty, this much more of the poet, that reveals that incarnation, reveals that incarnation is the transit from the old to the new, from boredom to the new, from inertia to movement, from death to life. Incarnation is the criterion of faith and the unbeliever, the mystery of life indeed. A mystery is so called because we do not behold the things which we see, but some things we see and others we believe. For such is the nature of our mysteries. I, for instance, feel differently upon these subjects from an unbeliever. I hear Christ was crucified, and immediately I admire his loving kindness unto men. The other hears and esteems it weakness. I hear he became a servant, and I wonder at his care for us. The other hears and counts it dishonor. I hear he died, and am astonished at his might, that being in death, he was not holden, but even broke the bands of death. The other hears and surmises it to be helplessness. He, hearing of the resurrection, says, the thing is a legend. I, aware of the facts which demonstrate it, fall down and worship the dispensation of God. He, hearing of a laver, counts it merely as water. But I behold not simply the thing which is seen, but the purification of the soul which is by the Spirit. He considers only that my body has been washed, but I have believed that the soul also has become both pure and holy. And I count it the sepulchre, the resurrection, the sanctification, the righteousness, the redemption, the adoption, the inheritance, the kingdom of heaven, the plenary effusion of the Spirit. For not by the sight do I judge of the things that appear, but by the eyes of the mind. I hear of the body of Christ. In one sense, I understand the expression. In another sense, the unbeliever. You see, this is an apocalyptic disclosure of the misunderstanding, of the interpretation of things. It is clear here that this love for men, according to Chrysostom, is related to the power of the mysteries that lead to the lack of belief of man, the eschatological transfiguration. This is related to the upturning of any social, political, and cultural contract or convention, and the reversal of the terms of life, to such an extent that, because of the love of men, all the given of this institutional habit are upturned. So this love for men is related to defiance, to authority, to responsibility, to acceptance, to peace, to sensitivity, to the blessing, justice, liberty, and par excellence with love. Love more powerful than everything that is disseminated in the marketplace in order to glorify the sacrifice. To put it more simply, the love for men through the incarnation reveals the real limits of a pastoral love for men, a Eucharistic love for men. Pastoral care through actions, not words, of responsibility and hope in favor of those in need. This is the sacrifice in love. When then you see a poor believer, think that you behold an altar. This is the altar, the poor believer. When you see such an one, a beggar, not only insult him not, but even reverence him. And if you see another insulting him, prevent, repel it. For so shall you yourself be able both to have God propitious to you and to obtain the promised good things. There are moments when someone feels that all this love for men, all this care for men, this dynamic tradition is sometimes forgotten or ignored by the Christian Church. Recently, in fact, it seems that the household of orthodoxy has been conquered by anti-Christian savage fundamentalists who exude this anti-Christian humanism. We see tension, conflict, heresy, even physical attacks against the subject of difference. This is our collapsing community, our collapsing society. And these evil people take with them the simply thinking, as Kyrillos of Alexandria would say, who need a hand for help, who need assistance, who need to be embraced. The elitist consideration of ecclesiastical life, the elitist consideration of people and their wounds, especially by institutions of the Church and any institutions, lead to anti-Christian populism that proves to be more dangerous than the phenomena that generate it. So the poet is right to condemn those who are in their comfort zone, in their individual salvation. And he says, you found your man, you have a hand to embrace you, a shoulder to lay your bitterness, a body to defend you. Have you ever blushed for your happiness? Even once. Have you ever blushed for your happiness? Have you ever thought of keeping 1 minute's silence for those in suffering, for the desperate? We're talking about those who are in their comfort zone, those who just care about themselves. This is about the opposite of incarnation. This is against incarnation. I have the impression that we should all realize the urgency of the need to change, the need to imbue ourselves in evangelical simplicity, the simplicity of the last things, in order to find a way to exist that understands that the essential is love. It is from love that everything starts and everything finishes in love. The affectionate love that requires a man who emanates incarnation. So we should all shout as loud as we can that it is time we wake up from our lethargic complacency. We need people to breathe. We need Christ to breathe and deny the harshness and the savagery that deforms and annihilates man. Allow me at this point to read a poem of Anorostakis. The interpreters do not have this poem, These are not the courses we know. Everything has changed. The names of the suburbs. Asylums are erected in the squares. Who is expecting your return? The successors are throwing stones to the others. You are an unknown. And you're cursing against the different, the others. You go and hide in your labyrinth where nothing can be heard, not even the sound of the drums. You will never be found there because you are aphorized. Your thoughts will be alienated and you will be assigned intentions, you will be praised, but with this temporary superficial praise, you will be defeated at the end. Don't try to defend yourself. So, get prepared to pay the price. Yesterday, we heard the word criticism and self-criticism. And I think that for a body to make progress, to move forward, the body needs self-criticism, which is a deconstructive process, a deconstruction process. The problem of today's church and its inhumanity is not the construction, but the inability to deconstruct. In the previous conference, Father Stavros, I had said, answering a question about the erotic character of man and the church. The problem is not the excessive erotic character. This is not the problem of today. The problem of the church and of theology, of our world, is the lack of the erotic character, the lack of eros. We live at the boundary of the non-loving, of the trivial. And I think Thanasis said it more analytically yesterday, referring to the pandemic and current challenges. Our position of the man of church reveals the Christ in which he believes. If we compare this Christ of either side, be it the elitist approach or the fundamentalist approach, we realize that this Christ has nothing to do with the Christ of the last things. We are talking about a different person, a different church at the end of the day. Priests tell me every now and then all over this country that they cannot address the layman because they are faced with tension, with conflict, unprecedented tension for orthodoxy in our country. In the name of God, in the name of Christ, we see, for example, witchcraft. I've said this on several occasions, but I can reiterate it. Yes, we do live in the times of witchcraft, also in the times of witchcraft. And I'm going back to my text. In this course, even the most heretic voices, such as José Saramago, emanate agony, genuine concern. We should read them more carefully in order to reach a new pact, at the center of which we will recognize the one single thing that our world needs. And this because Saramago and any Saramago, through their poetic approach and irrespective of their conclusions, of course they are not related to the mystery of resurrection, they are looking for the cracks that prove the humane character, the love for men, and create intimacy. Sarmango, just like Kazantzakis, in the context of his literary exacerbated approach, this is not a doctrinal exposure, he seeks the deeper meaning of the descent of God, which proves the condescending acceptance of man. As I said before, a decent God, but far away God, is not interesting to man. The intimacy that make the relation, the union, presuppose the experience in life, the fact that Christ is flesh of the flesh of man. Consubstantial with the human race in all respects, save sin. The co-substantial character with the Father, confirmed by the Church, is not of concern to the authors, the literary world. We're rather concerned with the obsessive search for the boundaries between the common origins and the sharing of the suffering of men. I feel that the problem of the world is not related to the negation of the divine nature of Christ, but with the possibility of the dialogue between the divine part with the human. We are in the waiting of a better understanding and acceptance of this dialogue, an acceptance of the affinity that will allow the understanding and will put aside the criticism against man. The created wants to feel that its mode of existence is not the result of an accident. It is the result of a practice of divine action that does not seek to blame the culprit. It seeks a common cause, a common journey. And this brings us back to the Council of Chalcedon and to the poet. How all this happened, everything was turned around, and you have never listened to the poet who deals with the problems of the world. Who is the captain? Who is a captain on mountains? Who offers grace and love? Who is going to offer the next generation the golden words on the grass? I have perhaps insisted too much on texts that do not form part of the Christian orthodoxy, but I do that on purpose to demonstrate that it is probably high time for an expansion of the sources of the Christian faith. We need a different perception and understanding. And this understanding is related to how others see the body. Because self-indulgence in our own way of seeing things cannot lead to a rupture with death. More often than not, when people speak about Christ, they mean Christianism. There's no doubt that Christianism is experiencing, even today, uncomfortable moments, moments of defeat that remind of nothing, the enrichment recommended by the person of the Incarnation, Christ. We experience moments that crush the person of Christ, that crush man, and vice versa. So it is more than ever necessary to clarify all this, to get rid of empty intentions and see the beauty that will save the world, the beauty of the person of which the appropriation is at the same time the appropriation of light. Let's see the beauty that negates all lies, whether these come from the fundamentalist side or from the side of those charlatans, the miracle makers who fill the squares during times of crisis and which trample on God and the man and lead to the de-Christification of Christ and the Church. I believe there's nothing more beautiful, more deep, more affectionate, more logical, more live and perfect than Christ, writes Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I say to myself with envious love, not only there's nothing else, there can be nothing else, indeed. In addition, if someone were to prove to me that Christ is not tantamount to truth, and that in reality the truth is outside Christ, in that case I would rather remain with Christ rather than follow the truth. Thank you.